Hey, what's up everybody? Today I wanted to talk a little bit about whether or not you should consider a Nikon D810 as a stills camera in 2021 and even for the next couple years to come. Now, one thing I really wanted to talk about is that the D810 is known as a very good stills camera and has been a camera that a lot of professionals use, whether it be for landscapes or portraits or something like that, anything that uses the really high resolution images. And it's been a great camera for that. People have known it as one of the top cameras in the world for the last 10 years or however long it's been since it came out. The thing I wanted to talk about is why you might want to consider it now in 2021. So unlike the perspective that you're going to see from a lot of fancy YouTubers and things like that, my point of view is a little more realistic for people like you at home who maybe don't want to go out and spend $2,000 and $3,000 for a camera. If you're a still shooter, there's a lot of cameras on the market from the last 5 or 10 years that'll do just fine for what you need to do. And this camera can do everything you want to do, including, high resolution images for, landscapes and things. So for real, like, this camera can do what 99% of people out there on the market want it to do. And it can do it for less than $1,000. So one thing I wanted to talk about is why this camera may not be great for cinematographers or people that are really into video. Now, the first thing I wanted to talk about is the fact that this camera really only goes to 1080p. It does not do 4K video, and so if you really need that kind of function, you're going to need to look at a more modern camera, like the replacement to this camera, the D850. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about is that there is a little bit of a misconception due to the fact that a lot of people get their information from YouTubers and things like that, you need autofocus for video. Now, if you're shooting a lot of things like vlogs and talking head videos and things like that, especially if you're shooting by yourself, then yes, the autofocus is going to come in very handy. You're going to get better autofocus for that type of video from like a mirrorless camera like what I'm using here, which is the Z6 II. Now, if you don't do that and you do more like artistic stuff and cinematography, actually making movies, things like that, anything you plan your shots ahead, especially if you can have a camera operator behind the camera to watch the focus, you're going to get better results in manual focus. And that basically is what it comes down to. If you're shooting movies, you're probably going to be focusing yourself anyway. In that case, if you're happy with manual focus and you're shooting in 1080, this camera can do everything that you need it to do, and it's going to get a really good image quality for video out of it. So that said, if you need autofocus, that's when you're going to want to step up to a more modern camera, especially if you need to do 4K. So let's go back to the people that I believe would be best suited by this camera. Now, let's say, for example, a lot of people have crop sensor or other Nikon lenses in their collection already. Let's say you've been shooting Nikon for a long time, you're still in a D40, D80, D5000, D3000, 7000 series, any of those cameras. Now, a lot of the people that have those cameras, this is going to be a considerable upgrade and something you might consider. If you're like me and you had half of your collection DX lenses and half of them FX lenses, then even more so you might want to consider jumping to a full frame Nikon DSLR. For me, for example, I started way back in the day where a lot of my lenses were full frame anyway, and so in shooting those same lenses and film cameras, I knew exactly what I was missing out when I would shoot it on my crop sensor camera bodies. So for me, I knew that some of my lenses were better in full frame mode. And so for a lot of you people, maybe you've been shooting a D600 or a D700 or something like that, then this is a considerable upgrade as well. So you may want to consider it for that reason. Now, this is one of the best full frame cameras that I believe you can get for under $1,000. And so You know, for a lot of people, you would pay the same for a D610 or a D750, etc. So for a lot of you guys, this might be something to consider. Now, some of you guys might have seen a couple years ago a video I made about the D800, and I actually had that camera for a year and a half or 2 years, and I really enjoyed it. And so that is actually why I chose to go with the D810 anyway, because I really enjoyed the images. There's very minor upgrades jumping to a D810, but there were a couple reasons why I decided to pay the extra money to go to the D810. In some cases, people are saying that the shutter slap is less so on this camera, and so it makes it possible to get better images at, you know, slower shutter speeds. And then also, the other reason that I really considered it for me is that I wanted 64 ISO. That makes it possible to not only have better images at base ISO than ISO 100, for example, but it also makes it possible to shoot without a ND filter in certain situations at least one step further. So it makes it nice if you're shooting, you want to be able to shoot a wider aperture, for example, you just go to a lower ISO and you're all set. So I like having that option available. So for me, that's the main reason that I went with this camera over the D800. A lot of the reasons that I chose the D800 still apply to this D810 today, so if you're interested, you might want to go back and rewatch the D800 video that I made a couple of years ago. And of course, the D800 is still a great option. A lot of you guys have seen where you could pick up a D800 for $500–600, less than that. And so, you know, you may want to consider between those two in that situation. The D810 is a fantastic camera. I haven't spent a whole lot of time with it. I've been playing with my Z6 II a little bit more, which actually has helped me out quite a bit because I do have a little bit of problem when I shoot with eyeglasses. Today I'm wearing contacts, but when I shoot with eyeglasses and I put the camera up to my eye, a lot of times the lenses fog up and I was having trouble getting proper focus. Especially considering I do a lot of manual focus. Mainly an issue here in Peru where I live in the jungle, but also in Florida and Texas and some of the other places I'm known to go out and shoot. So anyway, guys, those are the main reasons that I chose to use this camera and why I chose to buy it now. In a year or two, hopefully the D850 replacement will come out, dropping down the price of the D850. This D810 won't really depreciate a whole lot more over the next 5 years or so. And so, you know, hopefully I'll be able to get a D850 for somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,500. At that point, I might consider jumping to a D850. But, however, you know, I did want to mention that a D850, for example, has so many megapixels. For a lot of you guys that are shooting crop sensor lenses now, it'll help ease your transition if you want to go with something like a D850 or a Z7 to still be able to use your crop sensor lenses for a while you switch over. So for some of you guys, that might be a big benefit, and it's something I really wanted to mention. Now, there are reasons to jump to a full frame. I'm not going to go into that. For some of you guys, you're better off in crop or 4/3 sensors, but that's a whole other video, which I've actually addressed a little bit before. If you guys have any questions about that, feel free. So for me personally, right now, I actually shoot the Z6 II, and I wanted to use that as my basic camera that could do a lot of video and also has really good stills as well. To me, what I wanted to do was get a camera that would be, you know, smaller and lighter than my D500 was, but had a full frame sensor. Now, I might consider another crop sensor camera in the future as long as it's 20 or 30% smaller than my Z6 II. And I wanted to talk about why I'm still carrying a DSLR as well. For one, you know, I've got a pretty decent amount of F-mount lenses, and they do work pretty well on the FTZ adapter for the Z series cameras. However, I wanted to talk about, you know, in some cases, the DSLR is going to be better. And this is one of the cases. I wanted to talk about, in this case we're using a 50mm 1.4 camera on the D810, and that's known to be a fairly big camera. So the comparable lens on a Z6 II is the 50mm 1.8 right now. It's actually huge compared to this setup here. Even if the body is slightly smaller, the lens is much bigger and it makes up for it. And so the experience of shooting this lens on this body is much better in that regard. There are quite a few lenses like that. Of course you have the new 50 1.2, but it's a monstrosity in all reality. So there are quite a few lenses that are just, more manageable on the F mount. In the future, hopefully, I'm going to choose lenses depending on their size and their capability, what they can do for me. I do travel quite a bit and want to travel out of a camera bag, and so I have to pick and choose my lenses very appropriately. Also, I have to consider price. So in this case, if I'm choosing between a $200 50 1.4 and a let's say $1,000 lens that's similar from Nikon for the Z, then I have to consider my options. So right now I'm in a transitional period using the F mount and Z mount lenses depending on the application and the price and all these other factors. So for now I'm going to be switching over slowly over the next year or two, where I'm probably going to sell certain F mount lenses and getting certain Z series lenses, for example. Like I'll probably sell the 50 1.4 G lens that I have for the F mount and getting the 1.8 S lens for the Z mount. And there's other lenses that I'm going to do that to over time. As of now, there's no macro lenses out for the Z series, for example, and that's one case where I'm going to continue using this F body for a while. Like I said, in another year or two, I'll probably try to upgrade this to a D850, but in the meantime, I'm just waiting on prices to come down, changing out lenses, so on and so forth. So in the future, I'm going to consider also a travel camera, and that would be something like a 4/3 sensor or crop sensor. And the thing is that those sensors are 30-40% smaller than like a full frame sensor. So in my opinion, it needs to be 30 or 40% smaller than my Z6 II. So that's what I'm looking for in the future for a travel camera. Hopefully I can find something that'll work for that. But for any of you guys asking why I might consider that, when you have a crop sensor camera, you might be using like a wider angle lens, like let's say a 10mm, for example, on a crop. And in that case, you're going to have a deeper depth of field. So that's helpful for, things like travel photography and things like that. So the same thing that I benefit from in going to full frame, having a shallower depth of field, you can also get the same thing in reverse when you go to a smaller sensor camera. So, okay guys, I hope some of that will enlighten you on certain things. If you have any questions, feel free to hit me up and we'll talk more about it in the comments. Take care, guys.